The night was quiet, but not peaceful. The wind carried a restless hum through the pines, bending their dark silhouettes like mourners bowing in sorrow. The Great Plains had always been filled with stories of courage and betrayal, of blood spilled and lives reborn, yet that evening felt different. A storm of change was gathering, though no one in the village could see it coming. Fires flickered low, casting long shadows across the lodges. And in the middle of it all stood a woman whose swollen belly made her movements heavy, yet her spirit refused to bow. She was with child, but more than that, she carried the weight of choice. And her choice would defy her people. Her tribe was proud and unyielding, built on the bones of ancestors who had never shown weakness to their enemies. Every member carried the duty of honor and survival, even when compassion had no place. But she was different. She had always been quiet, observant, and soft-spoken. Yet her silence hid a fire that only revealed itself when life itself was at stake. That fire grew brighter when she looked beyond herself and thought of her unborn child. For months she had felt every movement within her, each kick and turn reminding her that she carried a future. The elders said her daughter would be born into a world that belonged to the strong. But deep inside she prayed that strength would mean something more than cruelty and vengeance. The day the fallen warrior was brought to the village, her world began to unravel. He was not of her people, though his features bore the same scars of wilderness and struggle. His skin was torn, his chest marked by deep wounds, his breath shallow. He had fought fiercely against men of her own tribe, and by all tradition, he should have been left to the earth, denied the kindness of care. To save him would mean questioning everything that had been taught to her since childhood. And yet, when her eyes met his, there was something in that broken gaze that refused to let her turn away. The Council of Warriors declared him an enemy. His presence was an insult. His survival, a danger. They ordered that he be bound and forgotten, left for death to take. But she could not forget the way his fingers trembled as he clung to life, nor the way his blood stained the ground like a warning no one else wanted to heed. That night, while the fires burned low and the drums of celebration carried the sound of victory, she sat inside her lodge with her hand pressed against her belly. The child stirred, as if restless with the same unease filling her chest. And in that moment, she made a choice that would set her against her own people. The woman knew the risks. A tribe that demanded loyalty above all else had no patience for disobedience. A woman, especially one carrying life, was expected to obey and to nurture. 8. Not to question the laws written in blood by those before her, but she had watched too many seasons of endless conflict, too many graves filled before their time, too many children growing into warriors whose hearts turned to stone. If her daughter was to be born into a world shaped by those rules, then she wanted to give her something different to inherit. Saving one life, she thought, could be the beginning of change. Every step she took toward the bound warrior was a step against her tribe. She remembered the voice of her grandmother, whispering stories of the earth's spirit that demanded balance. Mercy was not weakness, she used to say, but a gift that returned in ways unseen. The woman clung to those words as she slipped through the shadows that night. Carrying water and herbs in her hands, her courage held together only by the hope that no one would see her. When she reached him, his eyes opened, faint but aware, and though he tried to speak, only a broken sound escaped his lips. She placed water to his mouth, and his trembling stilled as he swallowed in the silence of that hidden moment. She felt her heart pound with both fear and conviction. She pressed her hand over his wound, whispering to the spirits to guide her, to forgive her, to give her strength. He was heavy with blood, yet his chest still rose, stubborn against the will of death. And she knew then that fate was not finished with him. What role he would play, she could not yet see, but something deep inside told her that this act of defiance would ripple through every corner of her people's lives. As days passed, she continued her secret. While the warriors sharpened their weapons and the women prepared for ceremonies, she stole moments in the quiet hours to tend to him. Each time she risked discovery. Each time she felt the weight of her unborn child pressing harder, as if reminding her that her choice was not for herself alone. She whispered to her daughter in the stillness of night, promising that one day she would understand. A mother's love was not bound by the borders of tribe or blood, but by the hope of what might come if kindness were given room to grow. But secrets do not remain hidden forever. Shadows move, whispers spread, and suspicion grew. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, she felt the stares of the elders linger on her longer than usual. She heard the harsh tone in their voices when they spoke of traitors and cowards. Her heart raced as she realized that the thin veil of silence around her was beginning to tear. The warrior's strength was returning, slowly but surely, and soon someone would notice. Her nights became restless. The cries of wolves in the distance seemed to echo the danger closing in. Each moment with the wounded man carried the weight of 1,000 eyes, though none were present. He began to speak in fragments, thanking her with weak words, asking questions she dared not answer. She told him little for fear of betraying herself, but in his gratitude, she saw a reflection of what she hoped the world could one day be. Yet, the choice she made was a line she could never retreat from. If discovered, she would be cast out, shamed, perhaps even condemned. Worse still, her child would bear the mark of her rebellion, and the tribe would never forget. She lived with that fear pressing on her chest. But even stronger was the belief that the life she saved mattered more than the law she broke. The unborn child inside her seemed to agree, kicking and turning each time her mother's courage faltered. One night, as the moon rose high and the fires burned low, the sound of footsteps echoed outside her lodge. Voices spoke in hushed tones, sharp with suspicion. Her breath caught as she realized they were searching, their words hinting at betrayal within the tribe. The warrior lay hidden nearby, his strength not yet enough to flee, his life tied to her decision. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her belly, feeling her daughter move. She knew the moment had come when everything would either be revealed or forever lost in silence. She drew in a breath, her heart racing, torn between the safety of silence and the roar of truth. Outside, the voices grew closer, the shadows stretched longer, and the fate of her unborn child, her tribe, and the wounded warrior all collided in that single moment. The woman stood frozen, knowing that what happened next would decide not only her life, but the destiny of everyone who came after her. Would she be remembered as the woman who betrayed her people, or the mother whose courage birthed a new way forward? Only the night ahead held the answer, and in that heavy silence, the future waited to be written. The woman held her breath as the footsteps outside grew heavier. Each voice carried suspicion, their tones sharp with distrust. She could feel the air inside her lodge thicken, the shadows pressing against her like a hand ready to uncover her secret. Her hand never left her belly, and she prayed her child would not stir too much, for even the faintest sound felt like it might betray her. The warrior lay nearby, hidden in the folds of woven blankets she had stolen, his breath shallow but steady. She looked into his eyes, and though weak, they burned with the silent plea of survival. She remembered the stories told around the fire when she was younger. Tales of men who tried to rise against the tribe, enemies who had been shown mercy, only to return with betrayal. Those stories were warnings, reminders of why no kindness could be given to outsiders. The elders would often remind them that blood lost to an enemy was a debt that could never be forgiven. She had listened back then with wide eyes, accepting their words as truth. But now, as she knelt beside the wounded man, she wondered if those tales had only been used to keep fear alive. Her life had never been her own. She was bound by duty, by tradition, by the weight of what others expected of her. Even her child was already marked by the tribe before she could breathe her first air. But something inside her resisted that weight. Perhaps it was the quiet rebellion of her spirit. Or perhaps it was the voice of her grandmother, reminding her that the earth was wide and full of mysteries beyond the tribe's borders. Whatever it was, it urged her to protect this man, even as danger drew closer. The voices outside grew softer, fading into the night, but she knew they would return. Suspicion was like a spark in dry grass, quick to spread, difficult to put out. She sat in silence for a long while, her heart pounding until she finally dared to breathe again. The warrior stirred beside her, his lips parting as if to speak. She placed a hand on his shoulder, urging him to stay quiet, but he shook his head. His words came weak, broken, yet filled with a strength that surprised her. He spoke of a raid of ambushes and betrayal among his own. He told her he had not come to fight her people, but had been forced into battle by the greed of others. She listened, her mind torn. If his words were true, then everything she had been told was only half the story. If they were false, then she was being blinded by her own desperate hope for change. But his eyes, though dimmed by pain, held a truth she could not ignore. They were not the eyes of a liar. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much loss, who carried the same weariness she felt in her bones. The following days stretched long and heavy. She tended to him in secret, bringing herbs to fight the fever. Binding his wounds with strips of cloth she hid beneath her garments. Each time she left her lodge to fetch water or wood, she feared being questioned. Feared the eyes of others watching her too closely. Her steps grew cautious, her words measured. Still, the whispers did not fade. Children spoke of strange movements near the prisoner's place, and elders began to murmur that perhaps one among them had grown too soft at night. When the village slept, she would speak to her unborn child in quiet tones. She told her daughter of the world she wished for. A world where mercy was not a curse, where strength did not always mean the blade of a knife. She told her that choices, though heavy, shaped the path ahead, and that sometimes the bravest act was not raising a weapon, but lowering it. She hoped the child could hear, could carry those words deep into her soul even before she was born. The warrior grew stronger with each passing day. His voice no longer broke when he spoke. His chest rose with more certainty, his eyes no longer clouded by pain. Yet with his strength came danger. Soon, someone would notice that death had not taken him as it should have. She feared that the elders would discover her secret before she found the courage to reveal it herself. And what then? Would they punish her alone, or would they cast her child into the shadow of her crime? She thought often of the men of her tribe, hardened by years of endless battle. Their faces carried lines too deep for their age, their voices sharp with bitterness. They had been raised to fight, and so they fought, never questioning why the blood must flow again and again. She wondered if any of them remembered what it was to forgive, or if that word had long been buried with their ancestors. Her defiance felt like a small flame against the storm of their anger. Yet she could not let it die. One evening, as the sun fell and painted the sky in red, she sat by the edge of the river, washing her hands clean of blood from his wounds. She saw her reflection in the water, tired and worn, her face pale with worry. She felt old despite the youth still in her. Behind her, the sounds of laughter echoed from the village, but it carried no joy for her. She thought of what might come when her secret was laid bare. Would anyone understand? Would anyone remember the old stories of balance her grandmother once spoke of? Or would they only see betrayal? The warrior joined her voice in those fears one night when he whispered, asking why she risked so much for him. She could not find the words to answer. She only told him that sometimes life needed to be protected, even when the world called it foolish. His gaze softened then, and though he said no more, she could feel his gratitude pressing against her like a silent promise. But promises did not shield her from the eyes that grew sharper each day. The elders began to send boys to watch the shadows, to guard against unseen threats. The women grew more curious, questioning her more than before, their words laced with suspicion, though their faces wore calm. She knew she walked on thin ice, and with each passing hour, the danger thickened around her. The unborn child kicked often now, restless inside her. She felt it as both comfort and warning. The time was drawing near when she would bring life into the world, and she feared what world that might be. Would her daughter open her eyes to a mother condemned, or to a people changed by an act of mercy? That question haunted her more than any other. The nights grew longer, filled with watchful silence. The wind howled against the lodges, as if carrying voices of spirits unsettled by what was unfolding. Each time she heard the drums of the tribe, her heart raced, for she wondered if they'd beat in celebration or in warning of what was to come. She could no longer tell which. One night, as the fires burned low, she woke to the sound of movement outside her lodge. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, not the careless steps of a child or the hurried ones of a woman fetching water. They paused near her doorway, lingering as though deciding whether to enter. She held her breath, clutching her belly, her heart racing. The warrior stirred beside her, reaching weakly for the knife she had hidden near his side. The shadow outside did not move for a long time. The air felt heavy, as though the earth itself held its breath. Finally, the footsteps retreated, swallowed by the night. But she knew then that her secret was no longer safe. Someone had seen, someone had guessed, and soon the truth would come crashing down upon her. The storm was close now. She could feel it in the ground beneath her feet, in the restless stirring of her child. In the sharp edge of every glance thrown her way, the choice she made was no longer hidden in darkness. It was rising into the light, where all would see it, and nothing could turn it back. What would happen when the tribe learned? Would they take her child from her, or would they strike her down before the birth? Would the warrior be dragged away and finished at last, or would his survival spark something she could not yet imagine? The answers hovered like thunderclouds above her, waiting to break, and as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, she stood at the doorway of her lodge, her belly heavy with the life inside her, her secret clinging to her like a shadow. The wind carried with it the voices of her people stirring awake, and she knew the day ahead would change everything. The fate of her child, the wounded man, and her tribe itself balanced on the edge of discovery. And the world would never be the same. The dawn broke quietly, but the woman felt no peace. She could hear the stirrings of her people outside, the crackle of fires being stoked, the voices of children chasing one another, the sharp commands of men sharpening their weapons. Every sound felt sharper to her ears, as though the whole village was listening for her heartbeat, waiting to uncover her secret. She stood at the doorway, her hand pressed to her swollen belly, feeling the weight of both her child and her choices. Inside the lodge, the wounded warrior shifted, his breath low but steady, his strength creeping back more each day. She knew his survival could not remain hidden for much longer. The elders called a meeting that morning. They gathered the men in a circle near the central fire, their voices stern and heavy. She could not hear all their words from where she sat, but fragments drifted to her ears, talk of betrayal, of unseen dangers, of enemies that still lurked too close. Her heart clenched when she realized their suspicion was no longer a whisper. They were searching for a traitor among their own. She avoided their gaze when she carried water past them, but she felt the weight of eyes on her back, the cold suspicion tightening around her like rope. The warrior had begun to speak more in recent days. Though still weak, he asked questions she struggled to answer. He wanted to know why she helped him, why she risked her place among her people. She never gave him the full truth, only fragments wrapped in silence. But his eyes told her he understood more than she spoke. He, too, carried memories of betrayal, of people turning on their own. He told her in whispers of his family lost to raids, of battles he had not chosen, but had been forced into. His voice carried pain, but also resilience. She listened, torn between fear of discovery and a growing sense that their fates were now bound together. Her child grew restless within her, the movements sharper, stronger. At night, she lay awake, whispering to the life inside her. She told her daughter that courage was not only in raising a spear, but in protecting life even when the world called it foolish. She prayed her child would understand when the time came. Yet she could not silence the fear that her defiance would doom the child before she even opened her eyes. One afternoon, as she gathered herbs by the river, she noticed one of the younger boys of the tribe watching her closely. He was too far to speak, yet his eyes followed every movement. She felt her chest tighten. Children had sharp tongues, and their words often carried back to the elders. She hurried home, but when she entered her lodge, the warrior's eyes met hers with quiet warning. He, too, had seen how the eyes of the village were turning their way. The conflict within the tribe was growing. Some of the younger men argued that endless war had brought only suffering. They spoke of the hunger that plagued the children, of the nights spent burying their dead. Yet the older warriors silenced them, reminding all that survival depended on strength and loyalty. The tribe could not afford softness, they said. To question tradition was to betray the ancestors. These arguments spilled into daily life, shaping the air with tension. She listened in silence, her heart aching with the knowledge that she was at the center of this storm, though none yet knew it. Her secret was not hers alone anymore. The warrior's strength was returning. He could stand now, though weakly, and move across the lodge with her help. His survival was a danger, but also a sign. He should have been dead, yet he lived. The old stories her grandmother told whispered in her mind tales of fate, guiding lives in ways no one could foresee. Perhaps saving him was not only her defiance, but part of something larger, something meant to shift the path of her people. Still, doubt gnawed at her. If the elders discovered him now, her act would not be seen as fate, only betrayal. One night, the drums sounded long into the darkness. The tribe celebrated a victory from a distant hunt, but the sound carried no joy for her. She sat with the warrior in silence, watching the firelight dance across his scarred face. He told her he had once been close to men like those in the village, bound to their codes, loyal to their strength. But loyalty had not saved him when betrayal came from within his own. His words cut into her heart like a blade. The lines between enemy and kin blurred more each day. She wondered if mercy could exist in such a world at all. The conflict deepened when the elders sent scouts to search the surrounding land. They spoke openly now of traitors feeding the enemy, of someone inside their walls breaking the sacred trust. Fear grew among the people. Mothers pulled their children close, warriors tightened their patrols, and the air was thick with suspicion. She moved carefully, every step calculated, every glance measured. But the weight of secrecy pressed harder than ever. The women of the tribe began to whisper near her, their eyes sharp with curiosity. They asked questions she could not answer, why she spent so much time alone, why her face looked pale, why she seemed restless. She smiled and spoke softly, but their stares lingered. She felt the walls closing in, the noose of suspicion tightening. Her child kicked fiercely that night, as though sensing her fear. The warrior watched her struggle, his eyes filled with quiet understanding. He urged her to let him go, to leave him to his fate before her people discovered the truth. But she shook her head. She had made her choice the night she first gave him water, and she would not turn from it now. His survival had become her burden, her rebellion, her hope. But hope was fragile. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the world in red, she returned to her lodge to find the blankets shifted, the herbs scattered. Her heart leapt in panic. Someone had been inside. She looked to the warrior, and his silence confirmed it. They had been discovered, or at least someone had come close. Fear clawed at her chest. She pressed her hands to her belly, whispering to her child, praying that the spirits would grant them another night of safety. The elders grew restless. Their voices carried louder, their suspicions sharper. They spoke of cleansing the tribe of weakness, of purging those who dared to betray. The air was thick with anger, the village on the edge of breaking. She could feel the storm pressing down on her from all sides, and still she clung to her choice. Though every moment felt like the last before the world fell apart, one night, as the firelight flickered low, she heard footsteps again outside her lodge. This time, they did not stop at the doorway. The hide flap stirred, and a shadow entered. Her heart froze, her hand pressed against her belly. The warrior reached for the knife hidden near him, his eyes burning with defiance. The shadow moved closer, the firelight catching a face she knew. It was not an elder, not a warrior, but one of the younger men of the tribe. His eyes were wide, filled with both fear and curiosity, and he looked between her and the wounded man in silence. The moment stretched heavy in the air. No words were spoken, but the truth hung there, fragile and dangerous. She knew then that her secret was no longer hers. The circle was closing, and the choice she had made was about to ignite something far greater than she could control. The young man's gaze lingered on her belly, then on the warrior, and finally back to her eyes. For a breath, she thought he might shout, might run, might betray her to the elders. But instead, he turned slowly and left, his footsteps fading into the night. She sat frozen, her heart pounding, knowing that silence did not mean safety. It only meant the storm was closer. The warrior said nothing. only watched her with eyes that carried both gratitude and sorrow. She lay awake that night, her hands on her belly, listening to the restless wind outside. She knew the days ahead would bring everything to light. And the fate of her daughter, her people, and the man she had saved now teetered on the edge of fire. The conflict was no longer only hers. It was rising through the tribe like smoke, and soon nothing would remain untouched. The days that followed felt like walking through fire. Every hour brought her closer to discovery. Every glance from her people cut deeper into her chest. The young man who had stepped into her lodge that night had not spoken since, but his silence weighed heavier than words. She did not know if he kept her secret out of fear, or if he was waiting for the moment when revealing it would serve him best. His eyes followed her now whenever she moved through the village, sharp and searching. She could feel the truth pressing against her like a blade at her back. The warrior grew stronger with each passing day. His body still carried the marks of battle. He walked more steadily now, his wounds closed, his breath deeper. Yet with his strength came a new danger. He could no longer hide as easily. His presence filled the small space of the lodge. The faint sounds of his movement could be heard if one listened too closely. She feared the walls would betray them. Even the smoke escaping from her fire might carry whispers to the elders. The tribe's mood shifted. The air was thick with unease, the elders gathering more often by the central fire. Their voices carried through the night, stern and heavy. They spoke of enemies watching from the trees, of traitors hiding among their own. The word traitor hung in the air like poison. Men sharpened their weapons with greater fury. Women kept their children close, and the young whispered rumors that grew more dangerous each day. The woman felt her heart tremble as she realized that her secret had become the very thing they were searching for. The child inside her pressed harder, the movements restless, sharp. Each time her daughter stirred, she felt the reminder of why she had chosen this path. She whispered to her belly in the quiet of night, promising that her courage would not break. But she also knew time was running out. Her child would arrive soon, and with her arrival came both hope and danger. A birth could not be hidden. When the cries of new life filled the air, the whole village would gather. Her strength would be too weak to guard her secret. The young man's silence could not last forever. One evening, he approached her by the river, his face shadowed in the fading light. His words were quiet but sharp. He told her he knew the truth, that he had seen the enemy alive in her lodge. His eyes narrowed with a mix of fear and anger, and she felt her breath catch. She begged him not to speak, her voice trembling, but he said nothing in reply. He only turned and walked away, leaving her heart pounding with dread. She returned to her lodge that night with the weight of betrayal pressing down on her shoulders. The warrior saw her fear and asked what haunted her. She told him that their time was running short, that soon the tribe would come for them both. He listened in silence, his face grim. He told her he would not let her suffer for his sake, that he would leave if he must. But she shook her head. She had chosen this path, and she would not let him carry the burden alone. Her child stirred then, and she placed her hand on her belly, her voice steady. She told him that what they were fighting for was more than survival, it was for the future her daughter would inherit. The storm broke days later. The elders gathered the people at the central fire, their faces hard with suspicion. They spoke of betrayal within their walls, of an enemy being sheltered in secret. The word traitor cut through the air like a blade, and fear spread among the people. They demanded that whoever had broken the law step forward, that the truth be revealed before the ancestors. The young man's eyes turned toward her, sharp and heavy with unspoken words. She felt the world closing in, her breath shallow, her heart racing that night. She sat in silence with the warrior, the fire between them casting shadows across their faces. He told her that if the tribe came for them, he would fight, even if it cost him his life. She felt both fear and sorrow at his words. She did not want blood spilled in her name, yet she knew the path they had chosen was already soaked in it. She whispered to her child, praying that the spirits would grant her strength for what was to come. The whispers in the village grew louder. Women spoke of strange movements at night, of shadows near her lodge. Children told stories of the wounded man they had seen by the river. The elders sent warriors to watch more closely, their eyes sharp with suspicion. The walls of secrecy were breaking, and she knew it was only a matter of time before they came crashing down. Her daughter pressed harder inside her now, restless and near. The pain of birth was coming, and she knew she could not hide it. She feared that her child's first cry would be drowned by the shouts of anger from her people. She prayed for a moment of peace, just long enough to bring her daughter safely into the world. But peace seemed like a dream slipping farther away. The young man came again, his face colder than before. He told her the elders would soon search every lodge, that they already suspected her. His voice carried no kindness, only warning. She asked him why he had not spoken yet, and he looked at her with troubled eyes. He said he did not know, that perhaps he wanted to see what fate would unfold. His words gave her no comfort, only deeper dread. The warrior urged her to prepare to flee, but she could not. Her body was heavy with child, her strength worn thin. She told him that running would only bring more danger, that they must face what was coming. He clenched his fists, torn between protecting her and obeying her will. The fire between them burned low, and in its glow, their silence felt heavier than words. The night of reckoning arrived with the beat of drums. The elders called the people together once more, their voices thundering in the firelight. They declared that the tribe had been betrayed, that the spirits demanded truth. They ordered every lodge searched, every shadow uncovered. Fear spread like fire among the people. She felt her heart break as she realized there was no longer any place to hide. She sat in her lodge, her breath shallow, her belly heavy with the child who would soon arrive. The warrior stood near her, his hand resting on the knife at his side. The sound of footsteps grew louder outside, the voices of men calling for entry. She clutched her belly, whispering to her daughter that the moment had come, that fate was about to be written. The footsteps stopped at her door, the voices demanding she open. The firelight flickered across her face, her hands trembling as she reached for the flap. The warrior's eyes met hers, filled with both defiance and sorrow. The child stirred within her, and she felt the weight of all their lives pressing into that single moment. The elders' voices called again, sharper now, demanding she reveal what lay inside. She drew in a breath, her heart pounding so hard she feared it would betray her. The warrior stepped closer, his hand tightening around the knife, ready to fight if he must. Outside, the crowd gathered, their voices rising with anger, with fear. With anticipation, the woman stood frozen between two worlds, the world of her people and the world of her choice. The cries of the unborn child echoed in her soul, mingling with the pounding of her heart. She knew the next moment would decide everything. The air was thick with fire and shadow. The silence before the storm pressed down so heavy she could barely breathe. The flap of her lodge trembled under the hand of the elder outside, ready to pull it open. The people waited, the warrior braced, and she held her belly as though holding all of fate itself. Suspense hung in the air, unbroken, unbearable. The storm had reached its peak. Nothing could stop what was about to come. The elder's hand pulled back the flap of the lodge, and the firelight spilled inside, flooding the shadows she had tried so hard to protect. The people pressed close behind him, their eyes filled with suspicion, anger, and fear. For a breath, silence filled the space, heavy and suffocating. The warrior stood at her side, his knife drawn but his body trembling with both weakness and resolve. She held her swollen belly, her breath sharp, her heart thundering against her ribs. The elder's gaze fell first on her, then shifted to the warrior who should have been dead. Murmurs rose through the crowd outside, voices sharp with shock. The young man who had first discovered them stood in the back, his eyes fixed on the ground as though ashamed of what had now come to light. The elder's face hardened as he stepped inside, his voice thundering with accusation. He called her a traitor, said she had broken the sacred laws of the tribe, that she had placed all their lives in danger by saving an enemy. His words struck her like blows, yet she did not bow her head. She stood tall, her hand firm on her belly, her voice steady when she answered. She told them she had not acted for betrayal, but for life. She reminded them of the stories of their ancestors, who once believed that the earth demanded balance. Mercy could be strength when guided by wisdom. She told them her choice was not for the man beside her alone, but for the child she carried. Her daughter would be born into their world, and she wanted that world to be one where compassion could grow alongside courage. Her words carried through the firelight, soft yet sharp, and for a moment the crowd grew quiet. The elder's face remained hard. He demanded the warrior be taken, that the woman faced judgment for her defiance. Several men stepped forward, their spears raised. The warrior tightened his grip on his knife, ready to fight to the death if he must. But before blood could be shed, the woman cried out, her voice breaking through the tense silence. She told them that her child was coming, that the cries of new life were near. Her body bent with pain, the first waves of labor coursing through her. The crowd froze, their anger tangled with shock. No one moved, for the arrival of a child was a sacred moment, one that even the harshest voices could not easily ignore. The elder hesitated, his eyes narrowing. He ordered the women of the tribe to bring her to the birthing lodge. The warrior was bound again, his knife taken, but he did not fight as they dragged him outside. His eyes found hers one last time before the separation, and though chains bound his wrists, his gaze carried a promise. She clung to that silent vow as the pain of birth pulled her into a storm she could no longer hold back. The night was long, filled with cries and whispers. The women surrounded her, guiding her through the waves of pain. Sweat dampened her brow, her body trembling with exhaustion, but she refused to surrender. She whispered to her child, telling her to be strong, to come into the world with courage. At last, as the fire outside burned low, her daughter was born. The cries of the infant cut through the air, sharp and pure, silencing even the murmurs of the crowd that waited beyond the lodge. The baby was placed in her arms. Small, yet fierce, her tiny fists clenched as though already ready to fight. Tears blurred the woman's eyes as she held her daughter close, pressing her lips to the child's head. She whispered her name softly, though she did not speak it aloud for others to hear. This child was her hope, her promise, her reason. She prayed that the world would bend toward mercy for her sake. When dawn broke, the elders gathered once more. The woman stepped from the birthing lodge, her daughter swaddled against her chest. The people watched in silence, their eyes fixed on the new life cradled in her arms. The elder raised his voice, declaring that while a child's arrival was sacred, it did not erase her crime. He demanded judgment, demanded that she be cast out with the child, and that the warrior be executed. His words struck like cold stone, and many nodded in agreement, but not all. Some of the younger men stepped forward, their voices uncertain, but clear. They argued that perhaps the woman's act was not betrayal, but a sign. They pointed to the child, saying her birth alongside the survival of the enemy might be a message from the spirits. The crowd murmured, divided between old laws and new questions. The elder's anger flared, but the voices did not fall silent. The woman said nothing, only held her daughter close. Letting the cries of the newborn speak louder than her own words, the warrior was dragged before the people, his body weak, but his spirit unbroken. He looked not at the elder, not at the tribe, but at the woman holding her child. His gaze was steady, carrying no fear. The elder lifted his hand to signal his death, but before the order could be given, the child cried out once more, her voice sharp and unyielding. The sound cut through the tension like lightning. For a moment, everyone froze. The elder's hand trembled, and his voice faltered. The people looked between the baby and the warrior, their hearts unsettled. It was then that the oldest among the women stepped forward. Her hair white as snow, her voice cracked but strong. She told the story of the ancestors, how once mercy had saved the tribe from destruction, how compassion had brought unexpected allies in times of need. She said the child's arrival was not to be ignored, that perhaps the woman's choice was guided by forces beyond their understanding. Her words carried the weight of age, and the crowd shifted uneasily. The elder's power cracked under the strain. He could not silence every voice, nor could he ignore the sacredness of new life. At last he gave a bitter command. The warrior would not be killed, but he would not be free. The woman and her child would remain under watch, their fate tied to whether the enemy brought harm or protection in the days to come. It was not mercy in full, but it was not death. It was a fragile thread of possibility. The days that followed were heavy but filled with change. The warrior was given small freedom under guard, enough to walk and help with work, enough to show that his presence did not bring disaster. Slowly, some of the younger men began to see him not as an enemy, but as a man. They listened to his stories, and though mistrust still clung like a shadow, seeds of doubt about the old laws began to grow. The woman raised her daughter with quiet strength. Each day, she whispered lessons of compassion and courage, planting in the child the hope that one day the world would be different. The people watched as the girl grew, her presence softening even the hardest hearts. She became a symbol, a reminder that life could spring even from defiance, that hope could survive even in the face of fear. Years passed, and though the elder's voice still thundered in the council, it no longer silenced all others. The young men who once questioned him now stood firm, shaped by the lessons the woman had fought for. The warrior, though never fully accepted, became part of their lives, his story woven into their days. And the daughter, born in the shadow of betrayal, grew in the light of possibility. The woman often looked at her child and remembered the night she first gave water to a dying man. She remembered the fear, the pain, the choice that had set her against her people, and she knew she would choose it again. For her daughter had not only changed her fate, but the fate of all who lived beside her. She had shown them that mercy could be stronger than anger, that compassion could be sharper than any blade. When the woman grew older, her hair streaked with silver, she still carried her daughter's hand in hers. She watched the tribe slowly turn, not fully, not perfectly, but enough to believe that the future could be different. Her daughter's laughter filled the air, her spirit bright, her strength undeniable, and in those moments, the woman knew that her defiance had not been betrayal at all. It had been the seed of change, the story of the pregnant woman who defied her tribe to save a fallen warrior lived on long after her days ended. It was told by firesides, carried in whispers, remembered in the faces of children who asked why. And each time it was spoken, the people remembered that choice, that courage, that hope. They remembered the daughter who changed everyone's fate, the mother whose love had been brave enough to shape a new world. Top of form, bottom of form.